right, so we're about ready to get started. All right. So, hi everyone. I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to Brooklyn Public Philosophers. If this is your first time here, it's a monthly public philosophy discussion and speaker series that meets here. It brings philosophers from the greater Brooklyn area to discuss their work with the general audience. I'm really, really pleased and honored that Rebecca Goldstein could be joining us today. She has a long list of accomplishments. She's a MacArthur genius. She was recently awarded the National Humanities Medal by President Obama. She's written, I think it's up to 10 books now, including The Mind-Body Problem, Betraying Spinoza, and most recently Plato at the Googleplex. So she's here today in Brooklyn to discuss why did the Greeks invent philosophy. So please join me in welcoming our speaker.
I used to live here. I'm not a Brooklyn philosopher anymore, but I used to live right on 8th Avenue between England and Berkeley. This was my library. So that's why when you said, invite me, I said, sure. I miss the old one. And I texted my daughter right before I came in here, and I said, I'm here, the old neighborhood, and what are you doing there? And he said, oh, it's a series of Brooklyn public philosophers, and I'm so honored to be asked. And she said, well, other public philosophers, oh, that's tough. What I'm honored about is Brooklyn. Anyway, I wrote this book, the last book, and it was my editor wanted a book about Plato. I'm not a Plato scholar, but he offered me a 2-book deal if I wrote a book about Plato. And so I got very involved in not just Plato, but the milieu, the culture that he came from, and became very obsessed with, as many people have been, with the Greeks and how much they accomplished. Here's Bertrand Russell. From his history of Western philosophy, in all history, nothing is so surprising or so difficult to account for as the sudden rise of civilization in Greece. What they achieved in art and literature is familiar to everybody. But what they did in the purely intellectual realm is even more exceptional. They invented mathematics and science and philosophy. They first wrote history as opposed to mere annals. They speculated freely about the nature of the world and the ends of life, without being bound in the fetters of any inherited orthodoxy. What occurred was so astonishing that until very recent times, men were content, and women too, were content to gape and talk mystically about the Greek genius. They went in a matter of basically 200 years from illiteracy to Aristotle and Aeschylus. They had a script, right, Linear A, which we have not yet translated, Linear B, which we have translated. It was lost. The palace societies, when that was destroyed, whatever it was that destroyed it, so was literacy. They had to, about 800, just as the city-states were emerging, they had to import an alphabet from Phoenicia, which they then adapted to their own language, and that they were the first to put an alphabet in one-to-one correspondence with their sounds, and the first to have letters or vowels. So they, but they had to import an alphabet and to regain literacy. And in a matter of, a very short time, they did all these things that Bertrand Russell catalogs here. Talk about being on the fast track. What's the secret here? Why were they so inventive, so intellectually fertile, and most of all, philosophy? Why did they create philosophy? Another great mystery is, well, they were so intellectual and so valued being exceptional. Why did they put Socrates to death, right? If they why did the people who invented philosophy charge Socrates with the crimes, the capital crimes of impiety and corrupting the young? So those were, trying to figure this out. And I did. I figured it out, I think. It's kind of buried in that book. I was expecting to get a lot of attacks on this because you're just supposed to hate and talk mystically about the Greek genius. I thought that this theory would get a lot of attention, but it didn't. Everybody seems to have just kind of accepted it. So that's odd. Maybe it's just so obvious. I don't know. Anyway, and I think that the solution to both of these mysteries, why they invented everything, well, all three of them, why they invented everything, why specifically they invented philosophy or discovered philosophy, the right verb for it, and why Socrates was put to death, are all intertwined with each other. So one of the things I think that is a clue to the Greeks is that the Greeks weren't the only ones formulating systems of life, formulating normative paradigms. This Greek explosion took place in the midst of a wider explosion. Between roughly 800 and 200 B.C.E., all of the normative systems, so here's a little, all of the normative systems that are extant now in the world were formed between 800 and 200 B.C.E. It was the German philosopher Karl Jaspers who first noticed this, that and he called it the axial age, because these normative systems reach out like radials into our own age. So the Abrahamic religion is formulated that Zoroastrianism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Confucianism, Taoism, I don't know, I might be forgetting some. Of course, Christianity and Islam just get lumped under Abrahamic religion, so those came later. But the basic viewpoint is the same, just historical differences between them. And as I say, and these religion systems that are all in place now, and at the same time, also Greek philosophy and Greek tragedy, right? They've all emerged during this period. In fact, mind-blowing, Confucius, the Buddha, the Hebrew prophet Ezekiel, Pythagoras, and Aeschylus are all contemporaries of each other. Their lives all overlap. So something explosive was going on here. Rather than calling it the axial age, I like to call it the normative explosion, and it's something like the Cambrian explosion in biology, that happened roughly 542 years ago, in which all of the phyla, all the forms of the phyla that exist came into being. Well, in some sense, the basic approaches to the normative questions were all formed during this period, roughly 800 to 200 BCE. And as I said, not only religion, but philosophy and Greek tragedy, right? This is the way the Greeks went after these normative systems. So in large reaches of the globe, there was a kind of questioning about, what does it all mean? I like to put it in terms of mattering. I think mattering is a very loaded term. I think it's both descriptive and normative. I think it's the way we make the leap over the famous is yeah. But the question that seems to have occupied people in large reaches of the globe, from the Far East and China and India and Persia, into the Mediterranean basin, up into the Judean Hills, and into Europe by way of the Greeks, is this question of, do we matter? Do I matter? The first person question is the most poignant of it. Do I matter? Do I have to do something in order to achieve mattering? Are we born into mattering, or is this something that we have to achieve? And if so, how? And in a way, all of these normative systems are addressing this question, how a person achieves mattering. And is mattering equitably distributed among us? Do some of us matter more than others? These are still questions that concern us, right? And that's why these basic normative systems are still in place. One way or the other, even a secularist like me inhabits the normative systems that were framed in that time. I got a little Calvin and Hobbes cartoon about the mattering thing and how relevant it still is, right? So let's say life is this square of the sidewalk. We're born at this crack and we die at that crack. Now we find ourselves somewhere inside the square, and in the process of walking out of it, suddenly we realize that our time in here is fleeting. Is our quick experience here pointless? Does anything we say or do in here really matter? Have we done anything important? Have we been happy? Have we made the most of these precious few footsteps? This question of mattering, I think that this is at the core. Why did it emerge during this period, what I call the normative explosion? So there are some social scientists who are beginning to address this question. So, for example, here is a graph from a paper by I guess they're psychologists of religion, Pascal Boyer and Nicolas Baumard. And what they pointed out was that the areas of the globe that participated in the normative explosion, or on the axial age, whatever you want to call it, had the highest caloric intake of any place else on the globe, right? So when you have to worry about surviving 24/7, you don't have the luxury of asking the question, and what am I, surviving for, and, I'm going to be gone, and so many have come before me, and their lives matter to them, and now we don't even know they exist. But no, you're just trying to survive. And this was really impressed on me just very recently. I had the opportunity, just actually before this semester began, I had the opportunity of going to Tanzania and spending some time with one of the last hunter-gatherer groups still existing, the Hadza. Here's me gathering with them. That's women's work. Women gather. And here's me hunting. They let me go hunting with them. Fortunately, we didn't catch anything except honey. So anyway, the Hadza live as our ancestors did, and they were pre-philosophical. They wake up every day. There is no storage. They wake up every day, and they have to fulfill their caloric intake, and or they starve. And it is a constant. It is a full-time occupation just to get your caloric needs met. So we had some time together, and and there was, many of them speak, it's a clicking language, but many of them speak Swahili, and so there was a translator, and I asked them, the elders, what do you consider a good life, and what do you consider a bad life? And they gave me answers along the following lines. A good life is on a day when you go out hunting and you catch some big game, and a bad life is, on the day when you don't catch anything hunting. So it was a very concrete answer. It wasn't, what does this all mean? And we kept going back and forth. They didn't get the point of my question, and they have actually no religious beliefs. I asked them what happens after you die, and they said, you rot. So this is, it's like there was really, except a few who had been exposed to Christianity. So anyway, it was really impressed on me that, when we just really have to be meeting our basic needs for survival, we're not worried about doing that or not. I think also the intimacy of village life, where people feel like they matter. I mean, you have this role. You're very, very closely knit society. It's so closely knit that the thing that they have to really worry about in these small village societies is incest. That you don't marry your cousins, or and there are ways of trying to keep track of that. But there is a sense in which you don't even have. You're so embedded in this life that the question of mattering also doesn't arise as poignantly, as strongly. Yeah, and this is a reconstruction of ancient Babylon. You can see, the anonymity of it, and it's a place where you could easily feel like, do I matter? There's also this, something that David Graeber had called the military coinage slavery complex. And this was in his book that I've now forgotten the name of, A History of Money or something like that. Debt? I think it's called Debt. The first 5,000 years, right? Debt, the first 5,000 years. And he points out that all of the societies that participated in the axial age had military, they had coinage, and they had slavery. So they were well-developed societies, but there's also, a value that could be put on different people's lives. Certain people mattered more than others. There's a lot more to figure out here. I think it's a job for social scientists. All I'm interested in is that this emerged, and Greek philosophy emerged during this period. And one of the things that is so interesting is the way that the Greeks went about answering this question, do I matter? What do I have to do in order to achieve mattering? Do some people matter more than others? And in particular, they didn't go for this kind of answer, which is a very dominant answer in Western culture. And Western culture is a kind of a mix between the Greek approach to this question and the Judeo-Christian approach to this question. Judeo-Christian approach to this question is it's very forthright. Do I matter? Yes, I do. Why do I matter? Because I matter to God. God had me in mind when He created the universe. God cares about what I do in my life almost as obsessively as I do, right? He is constantly watching. I was brought up to believe that, any little violation that I performed, any transgression, and I was brought up in a very religious household, God notices, and it matters to God, which was terrifying, right? But also, you did doubt for a moment that you mattered, So there was this kind of cupcake when I was a kid called a Hostess Twinkie cupcake. I wanted this thing bad. I just it looked so good. And it wasn't kosher according to the highest standards by which my family lived. And you know what? I never had one, right? Because I thought the Lord of the hosts would care if I bit into a Hostess Twinkie. I like the wordplay there. That's why I use the example, but it's the absolute truth, right? I wanted this. I still haven't tasted one because by the time I wasn't kosher, who wanted a Hostess? Who wanted other things? But so this kind of answer, it's a very powerful answer, and this was really impressed on me when, various interviews have described me as an atheist, and people wrote to me saying, like, what gets you out of bed in the morning? And obviously out of bed, I have so much to do, but there was a sense in which, for many, many people, there is no mattering without being replicated in the mind of God. And in the Hebrew Bible, the answer as to why we matter is also very straightforwardly given. We do matter. Genesis 9:6, whoever sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God made he man. So God's image being impressed into man's substance transmutes that substance, at least according to this approach, Abrahamic monotheism, into something that matters. The Greeks didn't take this approach, and that's really interesting. Their culture was saturated with religious rituals. There were rituals for everything, all the athletic events and the meetings, the police meetings and the battles. And there were, each city-state had its own special gods, and they were constantly practicing rituals, but the rituals were more in the way of trying to propitiate the gods. They were apotropaic. Anybody know that fancy word? Yes. Yes. Warding off evil, right? And when we see pictures that are inspired by the Greek religion, we don't see pictures like this. Rather, we see pictures like the Rape of Europa by Titian, or the Rape of Ganymede by Rubens, or the Rape of Persephone by Bernini, or the Rape of the Daughters of Lysippus by Rubens. There's Jupiter and Io. That's I don't know if you can really see Jupiter there, but it's terrifying, by Correggio. My my favorite picture of all, the flaying of Marsyas by Apollo. So Marsyas, you may remember, he was a wonderful flutist, and he challenged Apollo, god of mathematics and music, to a competition, a musical competition. Never challenge a god to a competition. I mean, if there's one thing you learn from the Greek myths, you never want to challenge a god. And Apollo cheated. The gods are always cheating. They're totally unreliable. The Greek gods. Apollo, what he did to Hector at the end of the Iliad, turned on him. So here, what Apollo did was he said, yeah, I'm going to play the lyre, you're going to play the flute, and we have to play it upside down. Well, try playing the flute upside down. Of course, Apollo won, and the punishment was that Marsyas was flayed alive. This is an incredible, I tried so hard to get a better image for you, but this is an incredible picture by Titian. It's very, very large. You see the studiousness with which Apollo is flaying off the skin of Marsyas. There's a little dog there lapping up the blood. And the reason Marsyas means a lot to people like me, who artists of one sort or another, is that Marsyas, he's a musician, and he cried out in his agony, why do you pull myself from myself? Which is seen to many people to be a very good description of what artistic creation is like, the agony of being pulled out of oneself, pulling oneself out of oneself. And one more picture, Jupiter and Semele by Rubens. Oh, two more. This one is terrifying too. Jupiter and Antiope by Van Dyck. Oh, one more. I can't get enough of this stuff, as you can see. Apollo and Daphne by Rubens. These gods they're terrifying. You don't want to get too much attention from the gods, unlike Jehovah, right? You want to be in Jehovah's sight. You want to have your life replicated in Jehovah's point of view. You don't want to get too much attention from these Greek gods. Something terrible always happens, at the very least a rape, when the gods pay too much attention to you. So the Greeks did not, why they invented this horrible, Olympian cast of characters, I'm not sure. A friend of mine tells me that the Welsh did the same thing. But when the Greeks went about trying to solve this major existential question that forces the normative explosion of the axial age, what do I do to matter? They didn't go about trying to answer it by way of their gods. I mean, would you want these gods involved in this question? They answered it in mortal terms. They kept their mortals out of it. Which is not to say, and that's of course the beginnings of philosophy, to go after this sort of question of mattering and what we have to do to achieve a life of mattering. But it's not to say that they were ipso facto philosophers, right? That they were a society of philosophers. And of course they weren't a society of philosophers. Say that the preconditions for philosophy were laid out here in turning this question of mattering and how to achieve a life of mattering into a question for mortals to solve by mortal means. And we know that they were not a society, not even the Athenians, of philosophers, because they put Socrates to death. But anyway, it doesn't make sense. There's never been a society of philosophers. It's very hard to be a philosopher. The Greeks weren't philosophers, right? Do you know who that old man is sitting there? running away from Socrates?
Plato.
What was it?
Plato.
Plato, yes. As an old man thinking the whole thing up. This too, I mean, just it's wonderful, wonderful. It's right at the Met, right in Manhattan. Wonderful picture. Anyway, so how did the Greeks go about answering this question? It was really this notion of kleos. Kleos is an old Homeric term that means a kind of auditory renown, having your name on many lips. So you don't want to be replicated by the gods, but what you want is that your existence is known of, is replicated in the minds of fellow citizens, fellow mortals. And in this way, your life acquires a kind of moreness. We like replication. It's not replication in God's mind, replication in other people's minds. I'll draw the parallels to our own society later on, but think large Twitter following, or something of that nature. Lots of likes on your Facebook. And the way the Greeks thought you went about, having this renown, being replicated in many people's minds, was by being extraordinary, by doing something out of the ordinary. It's not the ordinary who get attention, it's the extraordinary. And it didn't matter what kind of extraordinary. It could be, by being a good thinker, a good rhetorician, a good soldier, a good warrior, a good statesman, a rich person, a beautiful person, the worshipped beauty, that kind of extraordinariness. It could even be by being a scoundrel. There was this, actually, there was this one Athenian who was otherwise ordinary, and he went to Ephesus on the coast of Asia Minor, and he burned down what was then considered one of the 7 wonders of the world, the temple of Diana there, and he said it was because there was no other way for his name to get known. And what the fathers of Ephesus devised for his punishment was that nobody was allowed to say his name. Interesting question when you consider the people who take out guns and shoot up kindergarten kids, so that their name will briefly be there. The Ephesus fathers were extremely wise. Anyway, that they were obsessed with being replicated with kleos, I think is very borne out by their literature. And in particular, Pindar, who was the greatest lyricist poet of his day, 5th century of B.C.E., he created these Epicenian odes for all of the victors of the Pan-Hellenic Games. There was the Olympics, but then there were 4 Pan-Hellenic Games. And we have them. They've come down to us. And it is chock full of what I call the ethos of the extraordinary, that the way to achieve mattering is to somehow be extraordinary enough so that you will be replicated and you will be famous. It's a celebrity culture. Anyway, I'm just going to quote you from a few of them. Again, I tend to get carried away with them because they so make the point. But here's one. And 2 things only tend life's sweetest moment, when in the flower of wealth a man enjoys both triumph and good fame. Seek not to become Zeus. All is yours if the allotment of these 2 gifts has fallen to you. Mortal thoughts befit a mortal man. This was his, wrote this for this guy who won the Pancraticum. Here's another one. Great danger does not come upon the spineless man, and yet if we must die, why squat in the shadows, coddling a bland old age? with no nobility for nothing. One more. But he who has achieved a new success basks in the light, soaring from hope to hope. His deeds of prowess let him pace the air, while he conceives plans sweeter to him than wealth. But the delight of mortal men flowers, then flutters to the ground, shaken by a mere shift of thought. Creatures of a day. What is someone? What is no one? Man, a shadow's dream. But when God-given glory comes, a bright light shines upon us, and our life is sweet. This creatures of a day, this deep awareness. The wonderful thing about the Greeks is I think this was going on all through the centers of civilization that participated in this normative explosion. But the Greeks are so articulate about it, right? That's what's so wonderful about the Greeks. They really articulate this preoccupation with what can we do in order to achieve a life that matters? Live on in fame. That's all that we be poet worthy. Have the poets sing of you. Pindar, have him sing of you, because that was the only social media of their day, right? That's how your fame was spread abroad. And look at this. Even today we know of these guys because Pindar sang of them. The worst thing for the Greeks was the notion of disappearing without a trace left. And the metaphor that they often use is disappearing beneath the waves. With no marker, nothing to show that you once had been. And it is a terrifying thought for all of us, right? We know that there have been billions upon billions who have come before us. There's no trace of them, no trace, sign to show that they once had lived and longed and loved and lost and all the things that we do. And we know that the same thing's going to happen to us, right? So, it is this kind of, that's where this matter and instinct comes from. But for the Greeks, and they're very articulate about this, the metaphor, the image of disappearing between the waves with nothing left to show that you were there is a horrifying one. And here's a quote from the Iliad. The gods, this is Telemachus talking about his father who hasn't come back from the Trojan wars, Odysseus. The gods have made him invisible. If he were dead, I would not grieve for him so much. If he had been killed at Troy or died in the arms of friends after the war, then the Greeks would have made a tomb for him, and he would have won great glory for me. His son, glory is kleos. That's the word that's being translated here. His son, as well as for himself. Instead, the storm fiends have snatched him away and left no word of him. He has perished unseen and unheard of. To perish unseen and unheard of. This is, for the Greeks, it's worse than death. So there is this culture of achieving something extraordinary. It made them highly competitive, highly aggressive, and a tremendous amount of energy. And once the Greeks had vanquished the Persians, which they were not supposed to do, this terrifying invasion by the great forces of Persia that Herodotus tells us about, they had finally, met their heroes, they felt, and they were themselves. Before, they had developed this culture of, worshiping the heroes of yore, the great people who had left these monuments behind and crumbling, these great monuments from the Palace Society, inscribed with writing that they couldn't even read. But then with the emergence of the city-states in 800, the importation of an alphabet, and this kind of explosive achievement, but with the crowning glory being the vanquishing of the Persians, Aristotle himself says in the Politics that after the Greeks vanquished the Persians, they felt that nothing was beyond them, and that they carried this out into the intellectual sphere as well. Achievement. It's really a culture of achievement, not necessarily moral achievement. In fact, you read Herodotus, you read Thucydides, they were ruthless to each other as well. Here's another mystery. Here's something else that always mystified me. Why is Achilles considered the greatest of the Greek heroes? Even Plato in Socrates' defense in the Apology has Socrates quoting Achilles as the greatest of the Greek heroes. I mean, Achilles is kind of an asshole, really, to tell you the truth. I mean, what does he do? In the beginning of the Iliad, his girl is taken away from him, the girl that he won as booty from the Trojans, and when he's so angry, he has to go to his tent and pout for 11 books, right? And while his fellow Greeks are being slaughtered, he's the greatest of the warriors, and so they're all being slaughtered. The Trojan soil are being drenched in Greek blood. And, his honor has been hurt. How dare Agamemnon have a girl and he not have a girl? And this is not by any standards of our morality a laudable character. I mean, he is, of course, incredibly handsome, right? And he is half mortal and half immortal, as any good Greek hero has to be. And he's very, very fast, and he's the best warrior, and all the things that a hero needs on his CV, Greek hero needs on his CV in order to qualify as a Greek hero. But what puts him over the top? Why is he the greatest of the Greek heroes? Even Plato calls him the greatest of the Greek heroes. It's such a fixture of ancient Greek culture. Well, here's why. I think comes in the Iliad. Mother tells me he's half god, right? His mom's a goddess, Thetis, sea nymph. Mother tells me the immortal goddess Thetis, with her glistening feet, that two fates bear me on to the day of death. If I hold out here and I lay siege to Troy, my journey home is gone, but my glory, Kleos, never dies. If I voyage back to the fatherland, I love, my pride, my glory, Kleos, dies. Oh, I guess, yeah. So what's so great about him? He was given the choice. He alone, of all of the heroes, was given the choice. He can live a long but ordinary life, happy ordinary life, get to be with his lover, and all the women he wins as booty, or a short and extraordinary life. And he chooses the short and extraordinary life. And I think that is why he's the poster boy for this ethos of the extraordinary. You sacrifice your life, you die young, in your prime, and beautiful, but you will be known forever. And the Iliad is also called the Song of Achilles, right? He is, when this begins, "Oh, goddess, sing to me of the rage of Achilles." He's the guy that this is all about. One more quote from the Iliad. Hippocles begat me, I claim to be his son, and he sent me to Troy with strict instructions, ever to excel, to do better than others, and to bring glory to your forebears, who indeed were very great. This is my ancestry. This is the blood I am proud to inherit. Okay, so that's the ethos of the extraordinary. It's thoroughly secular. It's mortal. Puts a high burden on people. You are not born into mattering. You have to achieve it, and you have to achieve it by being extraordinary. Now, of course, there was a problem here, because most people are not, by definition, extraordinary. Most of us are, by definition, perfectly ordinary. The other problem with the ethos of the extraordinary is that it encourage certain lawless individuals like Alcibiades. So I'm not going to go into Alcibiades, or I'll never stop. He's the most fascinating figure in ancient Greek culture. Plato brings him in at the end of the symposium, and brings him in for very good reasons. But Alcibiades is he is Achilles returned. He is beautiful. He has every talent. He is, he speaks fantastically well. He can persuade everybody. He's very, very smart. He's rich as all hell. He's Pericles' stepson. He's got, aristocratic lineage. Did I mention how beautiful he is? He's irresistible to both men and women, and he creates havoc in Greek society. He first betrays the Athenians, goes over to their arch enemies during the Peloponnesian War, the Spartans. Then he betrays the Spartans, comes back to the Athenians, who take him back. Right, he's irresistible. And then he betrays both the Athenians and the Spartans, goes over to the Persians, and where he dies, he's assassinated there. So he's extra, and there are two different versions as to why he was assassinated. I won't go into that. But he's, it's like, it's like page 6 of the Post, Alcibiades' life. And he's bigger than anybody we have now. But he created havoc. Plato was very, very aware of this. Alcibiades was his older contemporary. So what do you do about this? Well, the way the Greeks solved it is you spread the extraordinary around. The extraordinary has to be in the service of the polis. By participating in an extraordinary polis, like Athens, you are thereby extraordinary. You can be a schlub, right? And you can still be an extraordinary person because you are a citizen of this extraordinary state. And that is also supposed to rein in the antinomian tendencies of individuals like Alcibiades. And this sort of participatory extraordinariness, also you can find Pericles, whose name actually means, Pericles, Kleos is in there, means wreathed with glory, the greatest rhetorician, statesman of Athens, talks about this, the participatory extraordinariness. I'll just, one quote, it's so filled, the Greek literature, with this stuff. The answer was just there. 2,500 years. Here, this is the funeral oration that is quoted in Thucydides, the history of the Peloponnesian War. And they've come to bury their dead. They've been routed. The Athenians have suffered very much. Here's what Pericles says in order to console his citizens. In sum, I say that our city as a whole is a lesson for Greece, and that each of us presents himself as a self-sufficient individual, disposed to the widest possible diversity of actions, with every grace and great versatility. This is not merely a boast of words for the occasion, but the truth, in fact, as the power of this city, which we have obtained by having this character, makes evident. For Athens is the only power now that is greater than her fame when it comes to the test. We do not need Homer. We're better than our forebears who needed a Homer. We do not need Homer or anyone else to praise our power with words that bring delight for a moment, when the truth will refute his assumptions about what was done. For we have compelled all seas and all lands to be open to us by our daring, and we have set up eternal monuments on all sides of our setbacks as well as our accomplishments. Okay, so you are all Athenians, you are all, rest assured, Athenian exceptionalism, right? You are all exceptional, you matter, your name will live on forever, you have Kleos. What was Socrates doing? What was he going around questioning, pushing this question of what the good life is? What he was doing was he was questioning the Athenian exceptionalism, the very basis by which they could quell that angst, that existential angst, what do I do in order to matter? He was knocking down the answers. When Plato has Socrates saying at the end of his trial that the unexamined life is not worth living, this is a terrific blow to the Athenian presuppositions by which they lived. And it's not surprising that he's accused of impiety. It's not that he was introducing strange gods. The Athenians were fine with that. They're polytheists. They accepted gods all over the place. In fact, if you remember the opening of the Republic, Socrates is going to a festival in order to celebrate the introduction of a new god that they just brought over from Persia or something else. I think Plato does that quite intentionally. There's nothing wrong in Athenian society with accepting new gods. But to question, the premises by which people were lived and tried to make out their own manner, this was this was more serious. But even then, Socrates was tolerated while the Athenians were riding high, while they had their empire, while they were convinced of their exceptionalism. In fact, they took pride in Socrates. He was a character, what a typical Athenian character, right? This kind of busker going around asking people these questions and catching them out on contradictions. But who won the Peloponnesian War? Not Athens, right? The Peloponnesian War went on for 31 years. Tremendous devastation. In the very beginning of the Peloponnesian War, there was a horrible plague because they were all crowded within the city walls. And the plague took away about a third of the population. Thucydides describes it in horrific detail. He's one of the few who actually caught the plague and lived to describe it. It took away Pericles, the plague. And then they were brought down extremely low. The Spartans won. They occupied the Acropolis, so their seat of glory. They had to look up and see these dumb Spartans, right? The great military victors, but no Athenians occupying their city. The Peloponnesian War ended in 404 B.C.E. The occupation took place until 399 B.C.E. At the first opportunity that they got their city back again, they brought charges against Socrates. That's one of the first things that they did. There was Socrates questioning. One more quote, last quote. This is from after the Peloponnesian War, when they're trying to rebuild their sense of superiority. And this is a quote from Socrates. It's actually a lawsuit that I had found. They actually did deal with their defeat very, very well. There was a general reconciliation. They didn't try to prosecute Athenians who had gone over to the other side, as many of them had. There was a general reconciliation, and no questions were asked. Were you for us or were you against us? And it was extremely wise. It really was. While our ancestors accomplished many noble things, the city has won renown, not least from these settlements, the reconciliation. You can find many cities that have fought nobly in war, but no one could point to a city better advised with regard to civil strife. Moreover, of those activities that carried risk, one might ascribe the greatest part to luck, but no one would want the credit for our moderation, would attribute the credit for our moderation to anything other than intelligence. In other words, nobody does loss better than we do, than we Athenians, right? They are, once again, right? Nobody can do failure the way we do it better than anybody. So, and it was in this context that Socrates, who had been questioning Athenian exceptionalism, the ethos of the extraordinary from the very beginning is brought to trial. Now, I just want to end by saying, the Athenians were not philosophers. They believed in any kind of extraordinary, and Socrates and Plato are Greeks. They buy into many of the presumptions of their Greek society. We are not born into mattering, according to Socrates and Plato. It is something that we have to achieve, and very few of us achieve it. It's very, very hard. There are those who matter more than others. It really wasn't until the 17th century that philosophy rethought this unequal distribution of mattering. For Aristotle too, for the Greeks in general, there is not this notion of every individual mattering. I think actually that came to us by way of Judeo-Christian thinking. So that when philosophy went back and rethought these things, that it questioned what had not been questioned by the ancient Greek philosophers, that we're not born into mattering, some of us matter more than others. But what Socrates and Plato did very much disagree with their society about is that any kind of kleos, accruing, extraordinary will do, right? It's not the glory, it's not the fame, it's how you go about being extraordinary. You go about being extraordinary by, it's very hard, arduous, by pursuing knowledge and virtue. And that's precisely what Socrates had been saying. Plato takes it much further in his long life and his development. Anyway, it's gone on too long. But that's my answer. Why did the Greeks invent philosophy? Well, because they were participating in this general question that comes on our species whenever we have the luxury to think about it. What can we do in order to achieve mattering? They did look to their gods. They approached it through on human terms. Their answer was given in terms of the ethos of the extraordinary, and that forms the preconditions in which philosophy could emerge. Philosophy emerged questioning some of the assumptions of Greek society, but not all of them. And we'll end with a little paean for philosophy. Of all of the normative systems that were framed during that incredibly fertile time, normatively fertile time, there's only one that has really changed significantly, made progress, and even rethought some of its first assumptions, and that's philosophy, because it's in the nature of philosophy to rethink assumptions, even the kind of assumption that got philosophy off of the ground in the first place, and that's extraordinary. So, thank you.